what's wrong with Canada? Mr. Trudeau, we all thought that he was an aberration, that he was a man-child, or he was, I guess he voted in because of his looks, because he showed no intellectual ability. He was kind of very vindictive. We saw that with the trucker strike.
Today's story is not just about one leader. It is about the unraveling of an entire country, Canada, under missteps so serious that they threaten its future. And who is at the center? Justin Trudeau. He was elected with charisma, forward promises, and liberal appeal. But the results? A stagnant economy, declining living standards, authoritarian policy impulses, and hostility toward the United States. Canada feels frozen in time. GDP growth is stalled, inflation is high, and youth life expectancy dipping. Now here are two questions I would love for you to think about as we go on. How could a country once leading by example fall so far behind? And what happens when a charming politician veers into authoritarian practices? People often thought Trudeau was just a harmless, flashy politician, someone who won on charisma, not substance. After all, Canada was once run by true conservatives like Stephen Harper, who boosted growth, controlled spending, and aligned closely with NATO obligations. But something changed, and it is far bigger than Trudeau himself. This is about how the core of Canadian politics and broader Western democratic norms were reshaped. Victor Davis Hanson breaks it down. Canada is being dismantled from the inside out, economically, militarily, and culturally. And Trudeau is the architect. Today, we connect the dots. Stick around, because by the end, you will see how Canada's decline is a symptom of global liberal elites gone too far. So stay with me, we are just getting started. Let's begin with the man himself. Justin Trudeau was voted in for his image. Photogenic, progressive, intellectual talk, but policy-wise, lacking. His response to the truck convoys, using emergency powers to silence protest and restrict freedoms, showed vindictive governance.
But who are we to speak? We had, under the first 3 years of Trump, everything was going well, and then we got rid of that, and we got somebody who was Obama on steroids as far as policy.
Contrast that with his predecessor, Stephen Harper, who championed free markets, disciplined budgets, and strengthened industries. When Trudeau first took office, many saw him as an upgrade. He campaigned on openness, inclusivity, and alignment with Western allies like the US and the UK. But what happened next was unexpected. Per capita GDP growth slowed, inflation climbed, and unemployment plateaued. Canada, once a strong NATO partner under Harper, began missing defense spending targets. Trudeau famously ignored his 2014 pledge to spend 2% of GDP on the military. Today, Canada is one of only 8 countries failing to meet that commitment. Meanwhile, the US averages 1.37%, while Canada budgeted $63 to $100 billion surpluses. Defense funds still lag. All this while, Trudeau was calling for peace, but leaving a border wide open. Truckers protesting COVID restrictions were painted as violent extremists, but immigrants and drug traffickers continued crossing unchecked. Yes, the optics were clean. The problems were ignored. In communities across Ontario, Quebec, and Alberta, people felt the pinch. And guess what? Trudeau's plan? More spending, more debt, more inflation. We had a system where policymakers inflated the problem and then blamed global forces, mainly the US Federal Reserve and China's supply chain. But as Victor Hanson notes, these choices were deliberate. Under Trudeau, Canada feels stalled. It begs the question, where did the promise go? Now let's talk defense. In 2014, NATO members pledged to spend 2% of GDP on defense. By 2024, most nations met or exceeded that benchmark, but Canada did not. As late as June 2025, the nation still lagged at around 1.37 to 1.45% GDP, despite repeated pledges. And do not forget history.
You're spending 1.37 on your defense expenditures. You are one of only 8 nations that refuses to honor your 2014 promises to spend 2% of GDP.
In World War II, Canada had the 3rd largest navy, landing at Juno Beach, a proud moment. But Trudeau stalled. He rejected NATO urgency, made excuses, and prioritized domestic programs over military readiness. When Donald Trump called it out, Canada did not respond. Conservative voices like Pierre Poilievre tried, but they ended up labeled as Trump puppets and split from mainstream politics. The result? A defenseless Canada and political paralysis. Meanwhile, Trudeau confirmed his open border stance. He said he would spend over $1 billion on border security, but that security never arrived. Instead, cartels exploited loopholes. Remittances surged to drug-running gangs, and Mexico ended up with a $170 billion surplus on U.S. trade, while Canada's own industries lagged. America responded: tariffs, demands for more troops at the US-Mexico border, and unilateral pressure. For years, Canada enjoyed US defense coverage, courtesy of NORAD and shared installations, while investing significantly less. Canada's citizens felt the squeeze. Consumer prices rose, borrowing costs jumped, life expectancy dropped. Yet Trudeau held regular podium events touting climate spending and diversity funds, while communities in Alberta, BC, and the prairies bore the economic brunt.
Denmark put in an extra $1 billion at the disposal of its colony, its North American colony. And we do have a base there, and the Greenland people got more autonomy, and it worked. And the same thing with, I don't know yet with Canada, but in the process of all this, it gets chaotic.
In the US, Donald Trump reshaped alliances overnight. He pressured Panama out of a Chinese port deal, revived Greenland's defense investments, and forced Mexico to curb illegal immigration by placing troops at the border. Meanwhile, Canada earned praise for $63 billion in trade surplus. But that same surplus invited accusations of mercantilism. Our exports dominate timber, dairy, and yes, drugs and illegal migration streams across unchecked. Trump's argument: you are taking surplus, you are benefiting, but you are not honoring your end. Conservative leaders like Pierre Poilievre were forced into defensive gymnastics, Trudeau, and you are seen siding with Trump. Support Trump's pressure, and you risk being labeled a puppet. The result? Canada comes off looking indecisive. Trump may be brash, but Hanson emphasizes that he gets leverage. And Trudeau? He is polite until Canada becomes a target. Donald Trump openly mocked Trudeau. He said things like, he is not a real conservative, and launched into trade talks demanding Canada honor its NATO spending. Trump teased that Canada would be better off as the 51st state, because why invest in its own defense if the US carries the burden? Conservatives in Ottawa found themselves stuck. If they called out Trudeau, they sounded like neo-colonial enablers. If they dismissed Trump's pressure, they seemed weak on sovereignty. Justin Trudeau exploited that dilemma. One wrong step, and Conservatives looked like puppets to Washington. They could not defend Canada's defense commitments without seeming anti-Canadian. They could not blame the US without seeming ungrateful. That vacuum allowed Trudeau's policies to cascade unchallenged. Under Trudeau, Canada's border policy shifted dramatically. It suddenly became porous, and people crossing irregularly from the US, that drew American ire. Washington demanded enforcement. Ottawa stalled. At the same time, Canada ramped up protectionism, dairy tariffs, timber restrictions, and punitive measures against US exporters.
Patrol your border with your friends. You didn't arm as you were supposed to with your friends. You would just be better off as a 51st. And just as a footnote to that little rant, nobody wants Canada to be a 51st state. That would be like getting California and Oregon and Massachusetts on steroids.
Meanwhile, Canada piled on immigrants while failing to integrate or address housing shortages and public services strain. All of this turned friendly neighbor trade relations into economic tension. Here is a serious question. Should a country be proud of its open border? Hanson says Trudeau's refusal to secure the southern border undermines sovereignty. Canada once prided itself on a secure frontier. Under Trudeau, that notion is evaporating. Compare this to Trump again. Within weeks, he cut illegal crossings by 97%. By deploying 10,000 Mexican troops. Trudeau promises to spend over $1 billion on immigration control, but we are decades behind. Unchecked migration strains housing, public services, and national identity, especially on First Nations reserves already stretched. And unlike the US, Canada has no remittance war against cartels, manufacturing. Universities accepted Chinese Communist Party-linked donations, even as the US warns of espionage. Hanson notes the same weak global order that invited cheap Chinese manufacturing is now encouraging overseas investment in Canada without accountability. Your grain, your water, they matter. And who is paying attention? China, India, big international firms. Yet Trudeau keeps talking about diversity and inclusion while giving little thought to strategic resource sovereignty. Compare again to global moves in Panama and Greenland. Trump forced them to wake up, and Canada is still waiting. The economy might be strong now, but strategic control is slipping. Suddenly, Canada seems defenseless, militarily, economically, and culturally. Hanson points out another source of tension: Canada's elites versus its working people. On campuses and in offices, especially in Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, progressive ideology dominates. Globalism is worshipped. Immigration is praised without question. But outside the elite enclaves, middle-class folks worry about affordability, crime, and disappearing industries. It is similar to movements in the US and Europe. They see coastal urban centers setting policy, while the rest feel left behind. In France,
I wonder, how did every country in the West wind up with the same fake system? Honestly, how did that happen? I wonder at a certain point, and clearly Trudeau and the rest of them, Carney, think this too, but how far can you push people before...
Marine Le Pen is silenced from debates. In Romania, a top populist candidate is jailed. Canada is flirting with the same pattern. Hanson warns, if regular Canadians have no political outlet, support for populism, not always peaceful, grows. Canada's sweet, polite image is at risk of being overshadowed by deep frustration. Complex problems demand real solutions, but Canada's decision-making got outsourced. Everything from immigration to energy policy shifted to technocrats like Mark Carney, George Soros-connected funders, and climate NGOs. They pushed carbon taxes, electric vehicle mandates, and open border policies, not through parliament, but through academic and financial gatekeepers. That created a system where elected offices became messaging hubs, not decision hubs. Citizens felt powerless. Conservative voters were told, "You are backward, populist, unscientific," so they disengage or they rebel. But a democracy that sidelines public opinion and enforces blue-check social norms is a democracy that fails, says Hanson. While Trudeau preaches unity, his policies have waged an open war on Alberta, the energy heart of Canada. Under the guise of environmentalism, Trudeau canceled pipelines, imposed carbon taxes, and froze infrastructure projects critical to Alberta's oil economy. The Trans Mountain pipeline delay alone cost the country billions, and the carbon tax, opposed by several provinces, was forced through the courts with little public consultation. Victor Davis Hanson would call this a form of elite warfare, where urban liberals sacrifice the working class to signal virtue. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and even parts of British Columbia rely on resource development. These are not oil barons. They are truckers, engineers, and rig workers. Families. Trudeau's government has embraced net zero by 2050 without clear plans to replace lost revenue or jobs. At the same time, he imports oil from Saudi Arabia. Let that sink in. A feminist, climate-conscious prime minister blocking local oil while enriching despotic regimes. It is no wonder Western alienation is rising. Support for independence movements has surged in Alberta. People there do not want separation. They want respect. But under Trudeau, they are treated as a moral stain on the national identity. Destroying the country's energy sector to win praise from Davos is not just bad policy, it is political suicide. What's happening in Canada is not unique. Hanson argues that Trudeau's failings reflect a broader collapse of the post-Cold War liberal consensus across Europe and North America. For decades, Western nations pursued open borders, free trade, massive bureaucracies, and progressive identity politics. The theory? Global cooperation would bring peace and prosperity.
What's wrong with Canada? Mr. Trudeau, we all thought that he was an aberration, that he was a man-child, or I guess he voted in because of his looks, because he showed no intellectual ability. He was kind of very vindictive. We saw that with the trucker strike.
The reality? Stagnant wages, cultural fragmentation, declining birth rates, and disillusionment. In France, Emmanuel Macron faces weekly protests. In Germany, the AfD, once taboo, is gaining. In Sweden, the nationalist right surged to power. In the US, Trump remains the most influential Republican figure. Trudeau was supposed to be the woke firewall, young, diverse, inclusive. But his collapse is proving the opposite. People want stability, not slogans. They want culture, not chaos. Borders, not bureaucracies. And when their governments ignore them, they start looking elsewhere, sometimes to outsiders, sometimes to firebrands. This trend is not slowing, it is accelerating. And unless Canada adapts, it risks becoming Europe's cautionary tale with a frozen economy, fractured regions, and a population too disempowered to push back. Canada was once the West's best version of itself, but under Trudeau's progressive rule, it is becoming a warning sign. Canada used to be seen as the world's moral compass. With peacekeeping, neutrality, and diplomacy, Canada had global goodwill, but that is disappearing. Victor Davis Hanson notes that a country cannot run indefinitely on reputation while eroding its foundational strength. Canada still boasts an educated population, good healthcare, and multiculturalism. But look closer. Under Trudeau, the nation has lost its ability to project influence abroad. Consider peacekeeping. In the 1990s, Canada contributed over 3,000 troops to UN missions. Today, Today, fewer than 100. Meanwhile, Canadian diplomats struggle to hold influence in international trade talks, and Trudeau's own reputation abroad has faded from star power to sideline. Trudeau's infamous blackface scandal was ignored at home but ridiculed globally. His scolding tone on world stages, lecturing India, ignoring China's human rights abuses, and flip-flopping on the Israel-Palestine issue alienates allies and empowers adversaries. Instead of acting as a principled mediator, Canada is increasingly seen as a performative, unserious player. Victor Hanson notes that Canada still values fairness, culture, beautiful landscape, public education, and healthcare. For decades, people were proud, center-right and center-left alike. But today, they see hospitals stretched, housing priced out of reach, debt-inflated prices, and open borders without community input. They see elites urging open migration from China, Middle Eastern countries, and Latin America, without asking, do we have the social integration systems? Do we even have the infrastructure? When these questions went unasked, ignored, they knew Canada's consensus had broken. Hanson warns that this is not a minor drift. It is a nation's degradation. Life expectancy drops. Democracy becomes perfunctory. Institutions prioritized ideology over public interest. Look at protests. The government locks down protesters. Lockdowns get newer, broader, more sweeping. There's ideological policing, media bias, and exclusion. Canada is becoming less like the Canada we used to know. Nice, free, secure. Here's the bottom line. According to Victor Davis Hanson, Justin Trudeau is not just mismanaging Canada. He is dismantling the pillars that made it strong: defense, borders, democratic integrity, and control over your resources. Do you believe Canada can course correct before it is too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this video helped you rethink Canada's direction, please click like, share it with your friends, and hit subscribe so you do not miss future analyses.